let's bring this home. Artificial intelligence. There's so much to talk about with AI. I'm going to start this out by discussing issues that I used to mention as recently as a year or two ago, and then get into some things that have kind of exploded within the creative community just in the last 3 or 4 months that we should address. So, artificial intelligence is less advanced but more pervasive than you think. AI is everywhere. It's being used by insurance companies to determine if you're eligible for a policy or not, including how fast you click on something when you're typing in your information. It's used by schools to evaluate student applications. Everything, pretty much everything that you are doing that involves digital technology in some way is infused at some level with what we call AI. But artificial intelligence is not yet what we call general artificial intelligence. You know, the kind where I can go down and say, give me a latte, and yes sir, and go down and bring you back a latte the way you like it, although we're getting close. But for specialized forms, for very specific knowledge-based applications, machine learning can be applied in a way that impresses us to the point where we sort of infer that there's some kind of like human intuition or knowledge at play. A good example is the AlphaGo, which Lee Sedol, who was the current, or not if he's the current anymore, but he at the time was the world champion Go player, was beaten in Go by, I think it was Deep Blue, was the AI. Huh? No, this was Lee Sedol. This was not chess. This is the more difficult game. Go. Chess easy.
Deep Blue was
Kasparov. Deep Blue was against Kasparov, and then AlphaGo. Deep Blue was Kasparov. AlphaGo was against Lee Sedol. And there was one particular move where even Lee Sedol, when he saw the AI play it, he thought it was a stupid move, but then realized later it was a brilliant move, what they call a brilliant move. But it was simply, I say simply, a matter of AlphaGo being able to play a near infinite number of games against itself, to study all the games that had been played, to play against itself, to be able to think further ahead in terms of moves than a human being possibly could. So it's sort of like, I guess you might say, your watch, right? If I was to guess what time it is right now, I would guess, don't tell me, I would guess it's maybe like 11:29. Not bad, right? It's 11:27. I was close. 26, yeah. But my watch, my digital watch, has even got the analog face on here. It just for comfort. It has a more precise. It does a better job of telling time than I could. That doesn't mean my watch is smarter than me, but it's designed to do this thing very specifically, very well. It's a tool I can use. Computers, artificial intelligence, I believe, much the same. There are complexities and ethical issues that we're going to talk about shortly, but ultimately, these are tools that we can use. Machine learning is applied in visual effects for simulations now of water, smoke, fire, natural phenomena that used to require a lot of hand wrangling by technical directors, and still does, but is now leveraging on machine learning applications that raise the level of fidelity to the next point, but also the efficiency in terms of how you get there, how long it takes, and how that can be adjusted if you have like a director's note, an artistic note. So CG animation as well. They're now trying to cross the uncanny valley by taking digital humans that are constructed in 3D CGI with whatever software application, and then using AI to deep fake on top of that. So it's a deep fake on top of the digital character to get that last creepy 10% kind of like removed from the equation. And it's quite promising. Disney researchers working on this, other investigative researchers at Carnegie Mellon and so forth around the world are pushing the boundaries of this. Again, the ramifications are exciting and terrifying. You can see how this can be used in many ways for entertainment purposes, how it can be misused in terms of basically implying or showing that, hey, look, you were here when you weren't there, or providing evidence for something that is completely manufactured. This has been going on since photography and video. It's been possible to manufacture photos, to doctor videos and things, but we're getting better and better at it. It's getting harder and harder to tell as something has been made up, to the point now where the problem we have is that people presume that everything is fake. Fake news, fake this, fake that. And not everything is fake, but it's very easy to say, and quite reasonable to assume, honestly, that most things are fake. And this can be something that we get lazy about, and also can cause problems in terms of just having a conversation. If everybody just thinks that everything is fake and nothing matters, it's hard to actually have a discourse about anything. In terms of a tool, these are the 5 things, maybe not the 5 things, but these are 5 things I picked out that artificial intelligence technology is very good at. Detection, being able to see what's going on, or to take that information in. Organization, being able to parse and categorize things. Prediction, based on this data, I think that this will happen next. This seems to show that we will have this result. Making decisions based on that. If these are the rules, this versus that, then therefore we should do this, and to make those rules those decisions very quickly. And responsiveness, speaking too quick, to be able to respond fast. So if you have a job which heavily requires any of these, or some combination of these abilities, your chance of being displaced by AI is probably pretty high. If you work as an accountant, if you work as a bank teller, even if you work as a doctor, AI is more accurate at predicting cancer, at diagnosing diseases, than human beings. This doesn't mean doctors are out, because for the machine to say, let's spit out like, bing, you have cancer, you have 3 months to live, and go down and pick up your medicine, you still need people for the EQ factor, right? For the human interaction, and also just the human decision making. But I believe, and doctors are already doing this, they're using AIs as an assistant to help them to diagnose accurately, to make sure they haven't made a mistake. Oh, you didn't have breast cancer, it was actually benign, but then they've removed more tissue than they should because they made a mistake. To be more accurate in diagnosis, to be more clear in terms of what the options are for the patient, so the patient can make a decision, as one example. But the funny thing, and maybe not funny, but the surprising thing is that the so-called creative professions, which people like, including myself, thought, the displacement from AI will be decades down the road. And we're seeing this now, and I'll get to that in a second, but I want to save that for last because there's a lot to talk about there. What I do want to mention, though, in terms of creating immersive interactive environments, which was the thesis of this particular class, is that AI technology is really necessary. If you want to have an adaptive environment that responds to you in a way that feels organic and natural, building in intelligent responsiveness with the tool is essential. Otherwise, you have to pre-program, pre-model, pre-design every possible, or at least as many as you can think of, possible branching scenarios, responses, and it's just prohibitive. It's prohibitive in terms of cost, it's prohibitive in terms of your schedule. So being able to design not only the responsiveness of the assets that are in that environment, but also the ability of the AI to create new assets, kind of the same way that in the most recent iterations of Tony Stark's armor in Avengers, it's like, boom, I've got a big shield. Like, whoa, where'd that come? It's like, nanotech, do you like it? To be able to, on the fly, create assets as necessary is going to be something that certainly for Web 3.0, for the metaverse, for those expansive environments, will be a requirement. People cannot possibly build, even if you have CGI skills, design skills, artistic skills, you can't possibly build everything with your own 2 hands. You need that help, you need that leverage in order to create those larger worlds, if that's your thing. And in order to create that wow factor where the granularity of the world and the fidelity of the world and the interaction within that world really moves somebody, I believe that what we call AI is necessary. And again, it doesn't mean that we need to have general artificial intelligence, certainly not self-awareness. There's no such thing yet as a self-aware AI, even though there have been some. I think there was the one Google researcher who was claiming that I think this AI is self-aware. I was having a conversation, it seems like it's a real self-aware being, but when you, at least in my opinion, when you really read through it, it's like, I can see why he would want to say that and how you might want to believe that, but it's really kind of like in terms of the Turing test, you can kind of still sense the machine in there. And it also makes you think about how self-aware we are, right? When you look at things that machines can do, it really makes you kind of in a sobering way conscious of how much routine process we go through without thinking about it, how little we actually think about anything during the day. There's so much that we go through on automatic pilot, which is a good thing, Because if we had to think about everything every second, I mean, the reactions that we have, even stereotypes and things, come from a good instinct originally, which is like, I saw a tiger and I saw it eat somebody, so tigers are bad. So if you see another tiger, hey, that tiger's probably bad. That's racist against tigers. Well, no, I saw it eat somebody, so I'm gonna stay away from that tiger, right? That comes from an evolutionary instinct that helps you survive. But again, if then that turns into, well, I don't like this type of person because I think that they're gonna cheat me, or I saw this person be mean to somebody, so I hate all of those people, that's where it becomes problematic. Stereotypes. But the ability that we have to very quickly make decisions and even to be reactive is what helps us survive. So this is something that, where was I going with that point? Oh, I just went into a hole there with a tiger, a racist tiger. Yeah.
Oh, the guy who said that, who claimed that the robot or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
That is, it's easy to want to believe that, and I think, who knows, we may find out that there is a point where she could be called self-aware, but also then we really, Yuval Harari talks about this, where how self-aware are we, and do we have a soul, do we have a being, are we just a bunch of chemicals and synapses that are firing and just like ants kind of milling about and doing what we do and thinking that we have agency, but actually we don't have agency, we're just kind of doing stuff because we're wired to do it that way. It's something that I don't think can really be, it certainly can be discussed, it's discussed a lot, but proven one way or another, who knows. Okay. But for games like The Sims, projects that we're working on, the idea of having a character who can, even if okay, this isn't a real character, that you can play along with that, can be quite fun. I mean, imagine, speaking of the Avengers, imagine having like, Loki, you come home and Loki's sitting there and he's like, you could set him to sensitive mode, like, how was your day? It's like, oh man, I'm so glad you asked Loki, because this and that, and he's like, oh, they're there, and he like tells you some like, anecdote to like make you feel better. Or you could send him on like jerk Loki. Like some people like a jerk. It's like, I don't want too nice of a person. If a person's too nice, that really bothers me. I want somebody who's a little bit of a dick. And so you like set, okay, I want like 90% nice, but like 10% jerk. And you put the setting there, and then every now and then he hits you with a zinger that is like, oh, okay, so I guess we are two separate people after all. And you can kind of roll with that. But you're interacting with a character who comes into your life in a way that, whether it's from a major brand like Marvel or from something you're developing yourself, can be quite intriguing in terms of an entertainment prospect. So, for our children, and their children, I believe that this kind of stuff, they will be the same way that you guys are digital natives in a way that I'm not. I mean, I use digital technology, but I'm not a digital native. I grew up in the analog world, and you guys, I believe, qualify as digital natives. And the generation, my children are kind of on the cusp of it, but I think their children, if there's still a generation after that, depending on what happens in the world, will really be part of this fusion, this hybrid metaverse, for better or for worse, of digital, physical, and everything that entails. So let's talk about some of the ethical considerations. When you get into things like eye tracking in VR, when you get into things like being able to detect a person's heart rate rising and falling, deep fakes, all of that, there's no lack of fun things you can do, but there's also no lack of horrible things that you can do. And certain countries, I don't want to name any, but you can think of them, who talk about how advanced they are with virtual reality and immersive media, etc. And they are also using those technologies in ways for surveillance, for population control, and America included. America's not as advanced yet in those technologies, but I'm not like labeling any one specific country as the villain. This is something that most governments try to do, is keep a lid on things, right? More or less forcefully. Most countries in the world, I think, try to let you feel like you're free and you have certain choices, and that if you behave a certain way, the clamp is not going to come down on you. But ultimately, if things get out of hand in some way that the government feels, any government is too much, the clamp comes down, right? So the idea of being able to create a metaverse or a virtual world in which you really can induce people to join themselves, right, to participate themselves, and to be happy there, and to kind of follow the rules, and not feel like they're being controlled in any way or guided, but to feel like they're making the choices, like they have agency, is the ultimate control dream, right? So this is something that's a big it's something I think about a lot in terms of, and even irrespective of immersive media, how are you being controlled? By traditional media, by television, by the newspapers, just by people telling you certain things and not telling you other things. And Americans, I'm getting off topic here a bit, but Americans, when they talk about countries, we're like, well, you don't know what's going on in your own country. And should immediately think, well, do you know what's going on in your own country, like in America? Because you think, well, I'm seeing things in the news that you're not seeing in your country. It's like, well, yeah, but there may be things going on in your own country, America, wherever, that you're not seeing. It's also not making the news, but is happening, right? People being skirted away to containment centers without being charged with anything and being there for 20, 25 years, stuff like that. So, which hopefully, if you guys don't see me again, it's because somebody saw this video and said, oh, he's onto it, and then I'm just, poof, I'm gone. Most recently, there's been, and it's funny, this really kind of caught fire in the last 5 months, is this among the creative community, and again, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but a lot of people in the creative community have this anti-AI imagery movement. And it's really become like, indeed, it's like this angry mob of people, content creators, et cetera, who are like, this is horrible, it's coming after our livelihoods, it's theft, et cetera. In fact, I have a list of the common grievances. I've been in so many, I try to minimize how many arguments I get in with this on Facebook, on LinkedIn, because the arguments, everybody's dug in on any issue, right? You talk to your Trump supporting uncle, you talk to somebody about climate change, people don't change their minds. I very rarely saw, hey, you know what, that's a good point, okay, I'm gonna change my worldview. No, people just dig in and you circle around, chase tails, and eventually people just get exhausted and quit the thread or what have you. But these are the common observations. One, AI-assisted content isn't art. Machines are making it, it's not art. And of course, history has no shortage of people saying what is and isn't art. Two, most of what I see is crap. We'll talk about all this stuff in a second. Three, the AI does all the work. It's all done by machines. The fourth one, it relies on the work of other artists. So basically you are exploiting other people to produce something. And for some applications, yes. But again, that's not unique to AI, and we'll get into that a little bit more here. It takes work away from human beings. So you're not gonna hire me to illustrate something anymore. You're just gonna go and type in some prompt and then bink, you're gonna get an image that's been created by images that other people had posted earlier, and you've paid me nothing, and you've gotten this for free, and it's gonna destroy the content creation design community. It's certainly gonna change it. It is gonna change it. And here again, we'll get into, I've got some examples, but I don't destroy, well, we'll see. It's illegal, it's unethical, and as we discussed in this class, illegal and unethical sometimes are the same thing. Other times, you've got the cutest sneeze, by the way. Is that a real sneeze?
Yeah, it is a real sneeze. So I try to control the strength that is not like boom, so I just
Just make sure like the back of your head doesn't blow out. You shouldn't suppress a sneeze. You just really, just go for it. It's fine. Oh yeah, just press a little bit. Yeah, you know, like my dad is like, die shoot, you know, or like he would sometimes sneeze or blow his nose like he was calling us, like what? Like it sounds like he's actually having like a sound, and then what? I didn't get...
because I don't like that loud noise, so I try to be like.
Okay. So wrenching this back. Illegal and unethical, not always the same thing. There are plenty of things that are unethical but are legal. There are plenty of things that are legal but could be considered unethical. And again, ethics depends on your relative point of view of things. And actually, legality also, depending on which country you're in, et cetera, varies. There's no one uniform set of laws, which is why when people talk about having laws against AI or this or that, it's like, okay, well, we barely can agree on laws of the things that we already have or have been dealing with for the past number of decades. Good luck with, by the time anybody comes to any consensus, even within one country about something, that technology still will have moved on. Which goes back to the point I was saying about, in my opinion, having a base set of ethics as a person and having a base set of laws as a country, as a society, is important because that base can hopefully inform anything that might come along in terms of, hey, nuclear fusion or Xerox machine, VHS player, AI, that you can apply those principles to that new thing, as opposed to saying, oh, completely new thing, we have to have a completely new set of rules for how to deal with this ethically, responsibly, etc. Last one, it's a fad. It's not a fad. I don't hate to say, it's not a fad. The way that things are being used now is a fad. I think everybody jumping on Mid-Journey and, hey, look, I made a kitten eating cupcakes with a robot. That kind of stuff is a fad. But AI as something that is going to be used creatively, and it is being used creatively and also being used for ill, as pervasive as it is, this is not going away. So to say it's a fad, it's looking at the current implementation, and it's also confusing the implementation for the essence of what that can do. So this is nothing new, right? We've seen reactions, reactionary responses to things ranging from the printing press to the computer. People will say, well, the printing press isn't going out and grabbing other people's work and calling it their own and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but when the printing press came out, there certainly was a big upheaval within the publishing world in terms of how books were produced, pro and con. Mass production, education going up, etc., access to information, to stories, etc., all good. People whose livelihoods relied upon the old way of hand transcribing books, etc., monks and so forth, with illuminated manuscripts, became more of a niche market because this was something now that was providing content to the masses in a way that was disruptive, that did affect people's livelihoods, pro and con. Overall, I would say we would assume that on the aggregate, good thing, right? The mechanization, the printing press, but also mechanization can be bad. Mechanized war, the machine gun, right, was horrible, is horrible. The computer, it's funny how so many of my colleagues, my anti-AI colleagues, seem to have forgotten, or they don't think it's the same thing in terms of the reactions that people had to the computer. There are two very specific things I remember when I got involved in computer graphics. And again, just for disclosure, as a reminder, my own artistic background has gone from being a painter and sculptor into learning CGI and video, and now experimenting with stuff like AI and virtual production and so on. So I've always tried to ride that wave and experiment with those things. I don't stop drawing, I don't stop painting, I do all of that, but I'm always looking to take on the new thing. Why not? So when I was getting involved in CGI at Ohio State University, I enrolled in this program called ACAD, the Advanced Computing Center for the Arts and Design. This was in 1992 as a graduate student. And at the time, ACAD, I think they still are, was an interdisciplinary center. So you had people in there from the art department. Actually, you didn't have people in there from the art department. I'll get to that in a second. You had people from the dance department, the art education department, the programming, software, engineering, etc., and architecture, medicine, but conspicuously not art, because Chuck Surrey, who was one of the pioneers of computer graphic imaging, he did things with plotters and creating hummingbirds and so forth, early, the first incarnations of computer graphics ever for artistic purposes. When he was starting this facility and wanted the art department to support it, he was told computers are not an art making tool. And this was back in was it 80s maybe? I think probably the 1980s. And this didn't go over so well with Chuck, so he was like, all right, fine. And he went to the art education department. They're like, yeah, we're in. And then very, you might say spitefully, but pointedly, once this facility was going, did not allow students from the art department to come in. It's like, hey, sorry, not an art making tool. And so when Chuck eventually, he's a great guy, but he was kind of given the hand, right? So he's like, all right, I give the hand back. When I went there in 1992, I was one of the first 2 art department students to be admitted into ACAD because it was finally open to that department. Chuck had retired. Wayne Carlson, the new director, was in and said, okay, let's bygones be bygones and open it up. But that phrase, the computer is not an art-making tool, how absurd, how stupid does that sound now? And that was not too long ago, right? 80s. Then, when I was at Disney as a computer animator, we were constantly hearing things about, I don't want to hear your opinion, sir. Constantly hearing things about how, the computer's doing the work for you, that's not really animation. Basically, people explaining what it wasn't, as opposed to the potential of what it could do. And also judging it by the limitations at the time. So I remember when some of the first computer graphics came out, from research centers, a lot of the stuff was honestly kind of ugly, right? Because, and no offense to the engineers who were creating it, but they're like a shiny sphere, you know, reflective on a grid, etc. Okay, not exactly high art, but they're like, oh my God, we created an image. There's an image. It was a big deal, and people are proud of that. But being judged then by the art world and others, oh, that's not for art making. But that was just a taste of where things can go. Look at where we are now with computers and digital technology. We can do anything we want. Or the time, or computer graphics even, people will look at stuff like Toy Story, even like, yeah, that's nice, I suppose, but still kind of ugly. You see how the cheeks are pinching a little bit, and I can see polygons and blah, blah, and everything's kind of shiny. It's just a product of where the technology was at the time. And I think we're seeing the same thing again with AI, that people are judging it creatively, ethically, based on what's happening right now, but not really thinking about where this can go, and especially when people say, I want no part of this. If this is going to be used in such an ugly way or unethically, I want no part. It's like, well, then you are robbing us of your input. We need artists, once artists, for example, with computer graphics, like myself, started getting involved, once the tools became friendlier and easier to use, and that just didn't happen magically. That came from artists like Chuck Suri, who I mentioned, getting involved, saying, hey, you know what? It'd be great to have, you know, like a pen, like Ivan Sutherland's, sketch tool, and being able to use a pen on a tablet, on a screen, to have more direct input than like a business machine typing in. There's no reason why the keyboard is the de facto input device for computer graphics. It was inherited, it's a holdover from like IBM, basically. So artists being involved with technology, I believe, is essential. Creative people being involved with technology is absolutely essential. It's critical in order to move that into the good place, creatively, the good place, ethically. If people just throw up their hands and say, well, I'm just going to wait until there's some regulations passed so that everything's cool, and then maybe I'll get involved, that's too late, because who's going to make the regulations? Who's going to guide that? You know, not you, because you've excused yourself from the conversation. So this is something I really feel strongly about, as you might be able to tell, and it's been like, I've seen so many of my colleagues just having these reactionary responses, which I understand, because they're seeing their livelihoods threatened, especially those who are designers and illustrators, and not necessarily thinking about, I shouldn't assume what they're thinking about. Everybody, when you get in these situations, everybody always assumes what the person is thinking about. But I'll simply say this, I believe there should be an appreciation for, one, the inevitability of the technology, it's not going away, and how then we can participate to make it what we want it to be. Photography is a great example. When the camera came out, people said some of the same things they're saying about AI. Oh, this is going to remove jobs from people. What are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about these jobs. Portrait painters. Right, if you wanted a portrait, the way to get it used to be you had to pay somebody a bunch of money to paint a portrait. John Singer Sargent, I think, is the artist I chose here. Cameras can be used unethically. You can take pictures of people and use them in ways to blackmail them, etc. So a camera can be used for, for evil as well as for good. Anybody can take a picture. That's the one thing people say about AI. Oh, well, anybody just types in a prompt and makes something and thinks they're an artist. Well, yeah, anybody can take a photo too. And especially because we've moved on from these gigantic hulking cameras to our phones. Anybody can take a picture. Anybody can make a film. Yeah, anybody can. Not everybody's going to make a good one. Not everybody's going to make something that somebody wants to watch. But I think it's great that anybody can do anything. That it's possible for anybody to do anything. That's not a bad thing at all. We don't want to have a protectionist society in which there's a caste system where only certain people can do certain things, because you never know where the next good idea is going to come from. You never know where the next innovation is going to sprout up. And guess what? First of all, portrait painting survived because there are people who still like to have their portrait painted, or people who like to paint portraits. But also, new forms sprouted up. Abstract expressionism would not exist, I believe, without the camera, because it in many ways freed artists from being beholden to realistic representation. Like, hey, we can do other things. We can explore form, shape, color, rhythm, texture. We don't have to only think about reproducing reality. So innovation was the result of this thing that was initially, and many people, I mean, we weren't around at the time, but researching historically, the advent of the camera, the printing press, etc., every time these new technologies arose, the computer, and indeed, people were affected. So when the computer basically flipped Disney on its head, there were animators who transitioned their traditional skills to the computer. and actually benefited the computer process because of that. They wanted more tools that can incorporate the way they worked in 2D and traditional animation with the best of the 3D technology. And in the latest films now that you're seeing from Disney, Pixar, and even other studios, you're seeing really a synthesis of like the best traditions of 2D animation with the cinematography and the granularity, just the richness of 3D animation, fused in a way that is truly organic and powerful. That only happens when people get together and work together to make it better. If people say, you know what, I want no part of that, and I have many colleagues who did from the 2D world who quit and said, forget it, I love drawing, I don't want any part of this computer, and I respect that, but we kind of, there's a loss there, right? Because you lose out of it. They also would say there's a loss because if they don't keep doing that, that tradition dies, and I totally understand that as well. But people get to make their choices. So my point here is that it indeed was impactful, it indeed was disruptive. There are people who transformed their careers from 2D to 3D. There are people like me who entered the market as a 3D artist, animator. There are other people who were out because they made the decision to, or they just couldn't adapt and they lost their jobs. So it's not without impact. But on the aggregate, I believe that the overall benefit is something that is greater than, and I'm not dismissing the people who get pinched, but anytime you have a flip, you want to try to see how can I be on the right side of this coin, right? And of course that gets more difficult the older you get. I know that now as I'm getting older. It's easier to do like when I was 30, coming out of graduate school, and I just kind of lucked into that situation that the digital revolution was happening. I didn't start it, I just was there when it was going on. I was like, oh, I'm on the right side of this. And I saw people, good friends of mine be on the opposite side because they had different backgrounds, different points in time. But here's another benefit, speaking of the camera. Edward Muybridge. This is actually before abstract expressionism really came to the fore, but his studies of animals, of humans, of movement revolutionized animation. We really were able to understand how to properly animate a horse or what the gait and footfall of a cat was like because we could study that through photographic capture in a way that we were just kind of guessing, oh, I think it's kind of doing that, or all the legs are this way versus that way. But now we can actually analyze whether you're doing it for scientific purposes or for artistic purposes. So this is another benefit of the advent of the camera. So yes, there were consequences, but also abstract expressionism, analysis, benefiting animation, good things coming out of that. The irony of this is, as I mentioned, I was giving a talk in Beijing in 2019 about AI and talking about some of the things I mentioned earlier in this class. And when I got to creative, I knew that creative would be affected at some point, but I said, it's going to probably be a few decades. I had no idea it would be like 3-4 years later that we would have, the summer of 2022. I think this is going to be a pivotal year where people are going to realize, wow, in terms of the tipping point for AI and just being on people's radar and how it affected, everyone, especially creatives, this was a year where you could not ignore what was happening. You might want to put your head in the sand, but it's finally come to the fore. And jumping to this particular year, I was inspired enough, intrigued enough by the technology to start, I'm going to start using it myself, playing with Midjourney and others, but also to interview people who were applying this artistically. So I think I've mentioned these to you guys before. These were 2 articles I wrote for Animation World Network. The one on the left is a creator's Midjourney. This is with Steve Coulson, who created not the first AI comic, and even saying AI comic, is like he wrote a story. It's kind of a Wicker Man type horror story that he then illustrated with Midjourney, typing in prompts endlessly over and over again until he got something that was in range of what he wanted, then taking that into Photoshop and getting it the remaining 10-20% to where it should be. And also working with a premise that actually benefited from the types of images that the AI was creating, because it didn't at the time have like a serial consistency. And also you get a lot of like establishing shots and more static images of people at the time. It's changing. And we had a great talk not only about his process, but also about the ethics involved. And he talked about the fact that he saw this as inevitable. They're already using AI technology for his advertising agency, professionally, but also privately when he does his personal work. He was smart enough, because of the ethical issues and some of the unknowns, to not go ahead and charge for this. So first of all, he was synthesizing images. A lot of people say, oh, well, yeah, AI is just going out and copying other people's work. It's like, well, no, not exactly. It is going out and scraping data, and then assembling that and synthesizing that into something that it thinks will satisfy the prompt you've given it. But it's not just taking something directly and giving it to you directly. You do see watermarks and signatures and things. You can tell, oh, this is taking somebody's artwork that they put up online, so you can see that, right? But it's a definite gray area that we're figuring out. Steve was smart enough not to charge for this. He put it up as a free PDF, and he said it's an experiment, and it was an experiment. And so he was wise to not try to monetize it until things shake out. Another artist, Michelle Robinson, who is still at Disney, she's a lift development supervisor there, and was a colleague of mine when I was there, has been working with photography for decades and other installation art, sculpture, and started using AI, not Midjourney, but actually using AI where she's taking her own photographs. So she's not data scraping, she's inputting her own photographs, many of which are photographs of other people's houses or things, so there's always some kind of acquisition going on, right? But then using that to generate these kind of weird, creepy, and she likes the creepiness. She actually likes the artifacts, whereas somebody like Steve Coulson would be trying to remove the artifacts to make something as pristine and comic booky as possible. Michelle was like embracing the artifacts, the weird smears and just kind of creepy, blobby things that happen, the incongruencies. She was embracing that as part of her artistic philosophy. And then, on top of that, when it was done, she would take the output and then do cross-stitch of that. So she liked the idea of having a machine be able to use, this vast cloud resource to give her an image, and then she sits down and almost in penitence kind of like hand stitches a copy of that over the number of months for her gallery work. So her gallery work would be a combination of, she's still figuring out ultimately how she wants to exhibit this, but a combination of the input photographs, the AI, she has video of the AI kind of making decisions, and if you've played with Midjourney and others, you've seen it like as it's assessing and refining and going through that process of kind of fighting against itself to give you the result that it thinks you want. That mutation, that morphing that happens, quite fascinating. And then the final result of the AI that she prints out and her cross-stitch version of that actually is turning into a quite rich ecosystem for installation art. So there are many different ways. This is why when most of the complaints I've seen against AI have been from the civilians, you might call them, average people who are just going in and putting in prompts and seeing what they can get. That is not the definition of AI. That is one particular use case right now that is propagated by certain companies who are profiting from that or maybe profiting from that. So there has to be some address of that. I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater because some baths are maybe less enlightened than others. And here's an example of, I think, an enlightened approach. And so this is Raitt, who's a colleague. I think he's still working at Weta. He's been in ILM, etc. He worked on Gollum in the original Lord of the Rings movie. Very, very proficient CGI artist and also photographer. So this is an image he did. I think he used Midjourney. And look, his prompt includes, this is the crazy thing too, the cool thing about the technology is that you can include shutter speeds, specific types of film, etc., and it will go out and grab something that satisfies that request. Now, my mom is not going to do that. Hell, I'm not going to do that. I'm not a photographer, right? I could look it up, but I don't necessarily know, oh yeah, I want F22, ISO, 100 Kodachrome. That just doesn't pop into my head. That's not my background. My background is painting, sculpture, etc. His is photography. So he gets this result, entirely synthetic, but definitely having the look of something that was shot with that approach because of his experience, because of his insight, right? And I think we're going to see more of this. So yes, the fad of people just playing around with things like Midjourney, etc., is going to die off. And what will remain are artists and creators. I'm pontificating here, but why not? My class. What will remain are people who are using it in a serious way with insight, with intellect, and with purpose to create something, and doing it in a way that is ethical, that is not exploiting somebody else, but using their skills and their experience to create something new and something innovative. And right now it's just experimentation, like just to see, hey, I can do that, right? This isn't the end of his creative journey. Oh, I did that, okay, done. It's like, wow, now that I know I can do that, what can I do with that, right? Where can I take that? So I really believe that when you talk about prompts, we should think about what a director does. I've had a lot of my artist friends who they say, oh, well, typing in a prompt doesn't make you an artist. Like, you have to have an idea, you have to draw it yourself, you have to color it in yourself, you have to ink it yourself. Yeah, maybe, and there's people who do. I can do that, but I also don't do that. I've worked as a director, a producer, where I will give somebody a prompt. Hey, I'd like you to go ahead and do this, that, and go, okay, and they'll go, that's what you do when you hire a creative. And that's actually the complaint that many creatives have, is that, well, yes, you used to prompt us, prompt a human being, and there's also not just a prompt, but there's an interaction. We talk and have a discussion, which the machine can't have with you, but we can have, in person, and you're robbing us of that. Right. We'll get to that more in a second. But I'm not putting that off, but I said, okay, I see your point there. But still, let's not, just backing up to the issue of a prompt, let's not discredit the notion of a prompt. Steven Spielberg, I just use the most obvious director I could find, is somebody who prompts people. He has a vision, he talks to the camera person, he talks to the cast, he talks to the crew. And again, there is an interaction there, there's an interplay. But he has a vision, he doesn't do everything himself. You don't need to do everything yourself. Who does, right? You work with other people, and going back to the point of the artists who say, well, look, yeah, that's the problem here. You're not working with people, you're working with a machine. It's like, what if I was working with a person who was working with a machine? So, for example, when I'm looking for artists now to work with, I want artists who are utilizing the tools. Who are, the same way I would look if somebody says, oh, I don't use the computer, I only draw everything on paper. There are some artists who I would work with who do that. We've had artists who, they're so amazing, they only work on paper. They have to take a photograph and send it to us. It's like, okay, fine, or we'll get it scanned by somebody else. But they're so amazing at what they do. I don't mind the fact that they're like technophobic about digital. But generally, you look for somebody who's plugged into the way you're working. So if I'm working with an artist or a designer, I'm looking for somebody who has had a wealth of experience prior to AI coming in, and now who is not threatened by AI, but who is actually utilizing and incorporating AI in an intelligent way into what they're doing professionally. The same way that my friend Michelle Robinson is doing with her personal work, and the same way that Steve Coulson is starting to do with his ad agency. Again, I'm just speaking my preference, my view, but I think this is there's an inevitability about this, and that you, as a prompter, you are in many respects a director. You're giving a directive, and also there's no magic to it. If you've worked with Midjourney or other AI tools, you know that you have to try again, adjust, thinking about what you're trying to get, using your experience, but also figuring out the rules of engagement of this thing, which is constantly changing, right? Every new version interprets that prompt differently. Trying to get some kind of consistency out of it, it's hard. It's like wrestling a greased pig. It's as difficult as trying to go into a dark room and get a proper exposure on your photo, as trying to get the Maya to do what you want for your 3D rigging, etc. There's no instant result. There are instant results, actually. And they are usually crap. So the things that people point to and say, oh, that's shit. It's like, yeah, that's where somebody just types in, hey, let's have Trump kissing Biden, and boom, you get that. And it happens right away, right? So you can get the instant result, but that's not the definition of the potential of the tool. This is also nothing new, the idea of prompting. So here's Sol LeWitt. 1960s, maybe even earlier, a conceptual artist writing instructions for how to recreate his wall drawings. So currently, anybody can take his instructions, and that's how his work is shown now. People will take the instructions for how to recreate the wall drawing and replicate that. What's the work of art? Is it the drawing that people put on the wall? Yeah, that's part of it. Is it the idea that Sol LeWitt initially had? Yes, definitely. Is it the piece of paper, the specific one that he typed on? Is it a Xerox of that? All of the above. That's part of why he's classified as a conceptual artist. It's his concept and his codification of that concept within a set of instructions, and the ability of people to interactively, it's almost like a performance piece, to reproduce that. Oftentimes that will be recorded, right, and included as part of the exhibition of people, students, interns, reproducing a work from, it's like you're bringing something back from the past, like you've taken a mosquito and a bit of amber, right, and suddenly reproduced a T-Rex. Maybe that's a weird analogy. But prompting, sets of instructions, working with machines, again, really nothing new. I want to kind of bring this around to two things that, in terms of the ethics, that I think really pissed a lot of people off when I put these on Facebook, but that's why you put things on Facebook, is to piss people off. But also to make a point, this was one. If you're up in arms about AI data scraping, I'm sure you've never photocopied a book, bootleg digital music, or used somebody else's Netflix account, right? So many of my friends said, it's not the same thing, man, apples and oranges. Like my 4-year-old can say apples and oranges, that doesn't mean we're having an intelligent conversation. Apples and oranges, apples and oranges. It's about exploitation. It's about using somebody else's work without paying for it, without credit. I have no shortage, and you guys know who you are who are watching this video, of friends who are against AI image generation, but are sitting in their cubicles right now, working on some design while they're listening to music they haven't paid for, and having something streaming on Netflix next to you that is on somebody else's account, right? Yes. And when I've challenged those people on it, they say, it's not the same thing. That's for my personal consumption. It's not like something that's gonna wreck the whole industry. It's like, oh, it's not? I mean, isn't piracy and respecting digital I mean, you're a content creator, and everybody has this really hypocritical, slippery sort of sense of personal ethics where like, until somebody's banging on the door wanting their lunch, they could care less about the lunch they're having that belongs to somebody else. And really, this is something that just, it blows my mind, and especially how easily this is dismissed by people who should know better because they create content that, yes, it's not exactly this. So, somebody said, well, your analogy is flawed because, yeah, I photocopied a book, but I didn't photocopy the book and then try to claim it as my own work. And I say, well, that's good. You shouldn't do that. But also, AI image generation is not just taking a copy of somebody else's thing and then in whole saying, boom, here you are. That is an influence that's being used in a synthetic way, combined with other influences to produce a result. Now, what constitutes copyright violation? What falls within fair use? What falls within derivative use? This is something that we have to talk about, but I believe that there's plenty of law that's already on the books that deals with this that we can apply to these situations before we start thinking about like, let's have new laws. Somebody said, this was kind of funny, oh, well, wait till Disney and these other companies jump in and start suing people because they're synthesizing images using Mickey or whatever. I said, yeah, that probably will happen, but if you think that Disney is like a white horse that's gonna run in and, or a rider on a white horse is gonna run in and rectify copyright law for your benefit, you're kidding yourself. They rectify copyright law for their benefit, locking up creators' rights so that 70 years past the death of the author, etc. Copyright is always riding a balance in the ideal sense between ensuring that people who come up with an idea can profit from it and not be eclipsed by somebody else who infringes, but also then not inhibiting innovation, allowing people to take the inventions and ideas of others and build on top of that and take that somewhere. And that's where, I'll get to that one in a second, but I can jump ahead here. Pop music, rap music, for example, sampling. This is nothing new. And of course, these issues will come up where people say, hey, you're just grabbing a sample from somebody else's work. And there are laws that say, okay, how many seconds of that can you use before it's actually considered an infringement? Also, what's the intent? What's the final result? Are you creating something out of that that is greater than that piece that you used? These are complex considerations that can't just be dismissed one way or another. And even people who would criticize, they say, oh, well, you sampled that from a rock album. And then there are people in the African American community who say, well, yeah, and what did rock and roll do, right? You basically appropriated a culture, right? The music of Africa, call and response techniques, the whole history of jazz to rock was basically white people taking cues musically, culturally from Africans and making it their own in a way that didn't acknowledge at all the source until eventually people say, hey, look, you actually we did, there was some cultural appropriation going on there. So for rap in return to go and reappropriate some of that stuff, I think it's all good. It's like, why not? And it just continues to advance the art form, and it also advances the discussion. People have reasonable discussions about, okay, what's appropriate, what's exploitative. And speaking of what's exploitative, this is another one that pissed people off when I posted it. Your data got scraped, I'll get you a Band-Aid. Do you know what this photo was of? Where was this taken? That was taken at Foxconn in China, yeah. So, while we're having these arguments, this tempest in a teapot about AI, it's on devices that Apple is selling us at overpriced rates and making huge profit margins on, but being assembled by miners in China, people who are throwing themselves out of windows, committing suicide, underfed, overworked, underpaid, and we just like, yeah, whatever, I gotta have my new thing, I gotta have my new device. We don't think twice about this. Even when I point, is like, well, that's a whole different thing. Well, it is a different thing, but it's also related. The key point is this: we really we have the blinders on, myself included, when it comes to the way that we exploit other people, the way that we take advantage or infringe on other people. Oh no, that's not really infringement, or that's different, or that's just me watching a Netflix video, that's not really bad. But then as soon as something affects us, hey man, that's taking away my work, or that, I don't like that. Then we become, we get our dainties in a twist about this. There needs to be some consistency. The hypocrisy is just mind-boggling of people, and even after you point it out, they no, different thing. And most people will say, I'm not even gonna argue about this because what you're saying is so ridiculous, it's not even worth addressing. I'm saying, okay, I just lost all my respect for you over that because you are basically doing conceptually and in reality what you were complaining about. You were infringing on somebody else's work, exploiting somebody else's labor, and just feeling like you were owed this in some way, or not even thinking about it. So, and having said all of this, I think that the big corporations are really happy that there's all this like hue and cry over data scraping for images, etc. Because it distracts you from the way that your data has been scraped and sold for decades. This is big stuff, right? How have Google, Facebook, entities you're not even aware of, the names you don't see, been taking the data that we voluntarily put online and using it in ways, selling it, profiting from it, manipulating elections and governments with it in ways that are hugely impactful, right? I'm not dismissing the seriousness of anybody who's losing a job due to AI image generation. I also don't think that so many people have lost jobs due to AI image generation. And I also don't think that people getting rich off of like making a robot kid and eating a cupcake and selling it, and then that is somehow taking work away from you as a serious designer. I don't really see that happening yet, but I do see that we have this wave coming where the AI technology the wave is here, quite frankly, and you can be hit by it, you can surf it. I prefer to surf than to be hit by the wave if possible. And also, just as a final note, the robots are watching and they're taking note of who the whiners are. So really, you should think about that. You wanna kind of be on the, people say you should be on the right side of history. It's like, remember, these guys are now being snapped.
I love AI.
So anyway.
Kevin,
yes.
Question. Would
Sure.
you agree with the statement that AI softwares, AI image processing tools are tools that organize huge amounts of information into simple, cognizable pieces of art or like pieces of images? Like the statement is trying to say, what AI does is taking a lot of information that is on the web, using algorithms to process it and deliver to you an idea, but that is not different from the process that many artists did in the past, like taking and copy.
Yes, I mean, even this presentation, I've got images in here. I've been data scraping. I went on Google, okay, I need an image of a camera, bam, I got that. I didn't give it attributes to everybody. I believe, in fair use territory here, because this is for education. I'm not charging anything for people who are watching this online. You're getting this for free. And again, it's for educational purposes. So I think within the context of fair use, that's fine, but that's data scraping. My colleagues will grab images all the time. Okay, they'll complain that, oh, you're grabbing this image and you say, I want it in the style of like Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, and then bam, it gives it to you. People do that already. I've been in people's cubicles in development rooms where they'll have a bunch of things that they've taken off the internet or from magazines and put up, and like, okay, we like that person's face, and it's like a real actress, and then, oh, here are some art styles that our director of production thinks is suitable for this project. And they will go and make the film in that form. There's no real difference except for the speed. And even the idea of the conversation. Yes, right now the AI does not talk to you. It doesn't explain its decisions, except every now and then you get a warning from the service saying, you can't use the word breast, or you can't use the word bloody, and there's censorship in that way. So I do believe that, this is why I believe that working with artists who are incorporating AI into their toolkit is going to be at least the near future. I don't see this massive unemployment as much as like there will be some disruption, but also raising the game. And those who don't use AI as part of their toolkit are going to be a bit behind. So this isn't just affecting, of course, image generation, but journalism, writing, screenwriting, writing a novel, what have you. There are already journalists who say that they will use an AI to compose, especially when it comes to factual information. Like they're doing an article about COVID, and they need a section about how mRNA works. They will type in. Now you can go ahead and just grab that. You can go to Wikipedia and grab the mRNA paragraph and then adjust it so it's not plagiarism. But you can also now have an AI say, I need information on mRNA from this point of view that highlights this aspect of mRNA technology, and you can put that, and then boom, and it will be, oh, that's pretty good, that's close enough, and then they can take it the other 20%. It's like 80% there, but at least they've kind of, I can get the article in on time, right, because of the deadline. So, again, you can see, I see your face like, oh, it's just constant acceleration. Yes, but what you try to do is use the tools in light of that. The tools are actually in some ways fostering that constant acceleration, but also there's an inevitability about it. So you have to also use the tools to find your way to float, so you're not overwhelmed by it. We're seeing people experimenting with using AI prompts for film, making little animation bits, little film bits. I really do believe that we will get to the point where a creator will be able to just use a prompt to make their own film in full. And many people think, oh my God, it's the end of the film industry, etc. No. What it means is that if you are a person who just works as an employee, if you're a hired gun, yeah, you're gonna have to up your game in terms of your toolkit. If you rely on being paid by other people to do, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're a hired gun, if you're an employee, this is gonna hit. If you are an independent creator, this is fantastic. I don't mean because it allows you to steal other people's work, but it allows you to do, as one person or as a small team, things you could never do before. The same way that the desktop revolution enabled this for people who are making books. And this is a good thing, to be able, now of course we're gonna then have a glut of work out there. There's gonna be a lot of shit, but there already is a lot of shit. There's also gonna be some really good stuff. One person was saying that eventually he said, we won't even need content creators. I said, really? He said, not even one, because you'll be able to go to Netflix, and instead of having on Netflix a catalog of like things to watch, you'll just tell Netflix, I want to watch a movie with the Muppets, but in the style of Quentin Tarantino, about a love triangle in a Japanese grade school. And then it will give you that. That sounds awesome, by the way. And it might be horrible, but it might be tremendously fun. You can imagine people actually having drinking games doing this, or parties. This doesn't mean that people still won't look for curated content. People are always, I believe I can say it could be on my gravestone, people are always, I feel, going to look for somebody else's story, what somebody else has to say, just because we want to hear what other people have to share. And there are people who are better at it than others, and who are able to tell things in a compelling way using whatever tools they use, a pen, an AI, in a way that moves us. I think that will never change. I hope that will never change. We'll see. But I think it will never change if we stay in the game. If we don't excuse ourselves and say, sorry, that's, we're against the machines. I think there's an inevitability about really working with the machines. We've been working with machines forever. Everybody here in this room and people watching have grown up with machines, have grown up with digital technology. So it's just a continuation of that process. And of course, there are discussions to be had. The problem I see with a lot of the discourse, and maybe it's just Facebook and to some extent LinkedIn, is that it's like two barking dogs, right? There's a fence there, and then if the fence is taken away, it's like eventually, okay, now we'll just have a nice chat, right? Because you kind of calm down and talk a little more reasonably. Okay, this is all very ad-libbed, as you can tell, quite extemporaneous, but hopefully it makes some sense. At least you understand my point of view on it, maybe. I'm still working on my point of view on it. I myself, as I use AI tools, have my own ethical stance. So we talked about what's your base, and I'll let you guys go here in a second. But I don't make stuff with AI and then put it out there as my work. Even if we're doing a presentation on a film or a project, I don't put it in. But I do use it as a conceptual tool when I'm thinking about something. Just to, even if I'm writing something, and the point is not an image, but just the writing, I will sometimes pop in a prompt just to get something that helps to spark something in my writing, and you may never see that image. I may never use it again. It's a throwaway, right? It's something that I use as a springboard into an idea that I'm writing about. So that there's so many ways this can be used. And I think that the people who will use it in the most enlightened and inspiring way are those who are not afraid of it, but who really, people like my children and their children who embrace it and just kind of run with it. We shall see. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you guys. Sorry to keep you over. And next week we're going to talk about the future of Taiwan, another exciting topic. And then we'll be almost done. I think we have 2 more weeks after this and we're out. Yay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.